So this webinar is about reporting, creating custom reports, and more specifically, detailed reports. And there's quite a few options within order time to do that. So if you're joining late, please just mute yourself. And the first thing is, if you look at the dashboards, whether it's the sales dashboards or purchasing or production, they all have these kind of graphs, and these graphs are actually driven by the reports. So if I kind of click on, let's say, the net sales by item report or graph, I'll get to the underlying report. And this is just a very summary. This is a summary report. If I click inside the summary report, I'm going to get to the details report. And this is what we're going to be customizing. And obviously, if I click on the details report, I'll get ultimately to the actual transaction. Okay. So there's the ultimate transaction. So how did we create this report? And I'm just going to, customize an existing report so you can kind of take a look at the structure. But we'll be going through an exercise of creating a brand new report from scratch. So the structure of this report is we have tables, we have columns, we have filters, and we have sortation. So I'm going to show you how we kind of decide which tables to present here. So I'm going to go and click on the reports icon, and I'm going to go new report. So this is if I wanted to start a report from 100% nothing. And what we're presented with are sources or report source groupings. And there are, let's say, about a dozen report source groupings, and each one of them contain a set of tables. So in a simple way, let's say we're going to start by looking at activities, right? So activities are any task, any email, any event, any log that's created. We have, those are all activities. And usually the primary table is the first table that's available. And all the other tables basically flow off the primary tables. So the activity controls everything that is part of the structure. And of course, we see things like activity type, the alerts, the user, the contact, anything that's connected to the activity. Now, of course, using this report source grouping, I can also report on, let's say, the sales rep, right? But you can see how all the other tables disappear because the priority of the sales rep is not very high with this report grouping. But if I add the activities, you can see that now I can add more tables. Okay, so let's take a look at just so once I pick a table, I can then click on the columns and then click on the table, and I'll see all the fields that I can use in my report. So, typically, let's say we have the ID, which is the ID of the activity, and the subject of the activity, okay, and the way the activity, and maybe the due date of the activity. Okay, so I'll just kind of view that. It's not going to give us a lot of information, but that's just, creating a quick report. Boom, we have it. So I'm going to continue customizing. And one thing that I generally want to see on that activity is the user. So I look for something that is assigned. So the user actually is called the assigned to. So I'm going to drag this over here, and now we're going to view again our system. Well, what do I see here? I see just a number. So that's not very meaningful to us, but it's actually the user ID, which is a reference to another table. And that's where we're going to start adding additional tables. So obviously we want to also add the user, and you can see here there's something called a join. And basically what is just a little bit of database technology learning here is that the user table and the activities table are joined by virtue of the user, the assigned to ID. Okay. Now, if I now have ability to add, let's say, the name of the user, so we'll just go ahead and add the name of the user. And if I look over here for this particular column that I want to have, I want to give it a better caption. So I'm just going to put over here under that the caption. And I can do that with anything. Like if I wanted to change the caption of the ID here, I go, activity ID. All right, so now I'm going to get some more meaningful results because now I actually have the name of the user as opposed to just the ID. So the ID really is just a way to filter or to to do a count or whatnot, but definitely not meaningful in terms of just viewing it. Now, let's say I want to kind of reorganize this and I want to move the user up a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of move that. See how I can drag it and just drop it. And that will put the user ID kind of in a more, in the first position. Okay. So far so good. Now, I don't want to see every single activity that we ever did. I want to see only certain activities. So that's where we have the filters. So I want to just see the open activity, and we have a field called is closed, and it's just simple yes, no, or Boolean that either goes to yes or no. So, or true or false. So I just want to see everything that is open, meaning that is closed is false. All right. So now I see a shortened list of that. Now it would be nice if I can group the activities by the actual user. So in order to do that, what we do is create a section. So again, I'm going to go back to my customize. I'm going to click on columns, and then on the top, the user has the ability to make it into a section. And if I make something into a section, it automatically is the first sortation, and means the first sortation. So I'm just going to view that now, and as you can see now, we now have a section for each user to and so we can do that, and I can actually filter as well. Now, interestingly enough, the filters I can filter by a name. So I can put in a first name and just type in the first name. But let's say I want it to do by a list, and that's where we use the assigned to ID. So here is a bunch, and let's say I just want to see Dean. I can pick that over here, and then we'll just get Dean's activities. Okay. Now, I also want to find out how many open activities there are for Dean. And I can go ahead and count these, but it would be a lot easier if the system would do it for me. So I go back to my columns, and let's say all I need is to find an integer column, which ID is, and I can look at the summary functions and I can say count. All right. So if I count every single ID, I'll get the total number of activities that are open. Okay, so that's the count. All right. Now, let's just make it a little bit more complicated and add another table, which is the vendor or the contact, or the customer or vendor, which is also associated with what's called the related to. So I'm going to go ahead and add the name of the customer or vendor. And now I see that activity as well. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and move that activity up a little bit, just below the user. And I'm also going to make that a section. So now I have by user, by customer, the activities for each one. So the one with no customer or vendor, there's 2 of them. For this customer, there's 1 of them. Total again, all the way down. So you can see I can create a number of different types of reports, create sections, etc. For the customer or vendor, I might want to say, I want to add the phone number as well. And I want to show it as part of that section. I can just pick the customer section, and now that field appears over here in the section itself as opposed to a column. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and save this report. So in order to save the report, I just go click Save As. And I'm going to go activity user demo. Okay. And it creates that new report for me. When I save it, I can then print it or export it. So the printing will print this whole report. Exporting it will export it to CSV or Excel, but in a format that's more linear. In other words, obviously we remove all the sections, so it's linear in terms of the data. Okay, so we remove all the sections when you export it because we just want to have the data for you. Of course, you can use this in Excel to pivot, create pivot tables or whatever other things that you can do. Now that I've saved this report, if I make a change, I can save it or I can save it as a completely new report. And each report will be visible in my either frequently run or my reports. My reports are the ones that I created. The frequently run ones are the ones that I've run most frequently, the last 9 really I created, and then all the reports are here. The reports take into account the roles. So you'll recall if I go to the order time admin section and I look at all the roles that you've set up, it takes into account those roles. So if someone is not able to see sales orders and quotes, they won't obviously have access to that report grouping, sales orders and quotes. All right, so that's kind of the the intro. Now we're going to make it a little bit more. We're going to go and we're going to create a sales order report. And what I want to achieve here is I want to show kind of open sales orders, what need to be shipped by item and by customer. First by item, then by customer. And I want to create the report so everybody can see that. All right. So I'm going to go to that, and I want to create that report. And I have we have a canned report that we can start off with, and that's the sales orders by item. Okay. The sales orders by item, let's take a look at this report here. And you can see here we have some filters where it's open. In other words, the filter that the sales order is open. I only want to see sales orders. The sales orders and quotes share the same table. That's why I want to filter out quotes. I don't want to see that, and I don't want to see any anything that has a quantity of 0. I'm actually going to remove that because I'm going to use a different type of columns. All right, so let's go take a look at our columns here. And we have the name of the product. We have the description of the product from the items table. We have the group, all right, the group from the items group table. We have the unit of measure from the unit of measure table, and that's the abbreviation. Like I changed the caption, as you can see, to UOM. We have the sales order number, the sales order line number, the name of the customer, the sales order date, the promise date, customer PO, and the quantity. And as you can see here, we're summing up all the quantities. Now, the quantity here is the original quantity of the sales order itself. I don't want that because I want to only show open quantity. So looking at the sales order and quote line items, I'm hoping to find something that could fit that, and we do have it. It's called the open quantity. And the open quantity is the sales order quantity less what's already been shipped. Okay, less what's already been shipped. The other thing that I also want to show, and this we just added, is the open amount as well. In other words, usually the quantity times the price is what we call the extension. So quantity times price, but the open amount is the price times the open quantity, and that's what we want. So I'm going to remove this one over here, and I want to sum both of these. I want to know what the total is, and I want to sum those. Okay, so I'll go back to my open filters, and the open quantity I want that not equal to 0. Okay. So there is so now I can see I'm going to get a different type of report, and I'm going to just get the open quantity and the open amount. And as you can see here, by item and by customer. All right, just like I did in the previous report, you can see here the unit of measure, the description, and the group are all part of the item section. And how do we do that? We simply, if I click on that, I just said make it part of the item section. Right? And I can make anything really part of the item section that I want. Okay. So let's create another section, and this time it's going to be the customers or the leads. All right, so when I do that, the customers or leads jumps to just below the item section. Okay. So now I have a completely different type of view. The same thing by item, but this time there's another section by customer, and everything has the subtotal. Okay. So you can see that. And of course, if I wanted to save that, I go save as. I can't save it because it's a new report. I don't see the save. I go save as, and we'll go open SOs by item and customer demo. Okay. Now let's say I want to change my mind and I actually want to do the customer or the customer first. So again, I go back to that, and all I have to do is kind of move that on top, and that will change the order by. So now the customer is going to be the main sortation. Okay, so now it's customer, then item, customer, then item, customer, then item. And if I just want to save and overwrite that, I just click save. All right, so that now that clicks. Or if I wanted to create a brand new report, I could have gone save as well. Okay. Now, of course, I click on this line and I get to my actual sales order. Yeah, there it is. So we fill this sales order, create the ship doc. All right, that line item didn't have any stock, so one of those line items should disappear. There it is. So that line item, which was on the report, but it got totally filled, now is off this open sales report by virtue of our filter, which basically says the open quantity is not equal to 0. Okay, so the fact that we've shipped the entire quantity. Now, sometimes you might have an open quantity, but you cleared the line. In other words, on this, let's say, sales order that we just did over here, so we'll go back to this sales order, and we're never going to ship this line at all. So I want to clear it. I want to clear that line. But the problem is, because the quantity may still be open, it may appear on the sales order. So what you want to do is you want to add another filter just to make sure, called cleared. I can find it. Manually cleared. Sorry. Cleared is equal to false, right? So it's not checked as false. Checked is equal to true, right? And then we get that report. So we'll save that. All right. We have some more time, and I don't see any questions here that we can have here. Customer types, user roles. So yeah, customer types is a very good way to organize your customers. The customer types, you can set up your customer types. So I'm on the admin section over here, and I want to click on profile lists, and then here are my customer types. All right, so we have a bunch of customer types here. I create a new one by clicking the little plus sign near the records, and let's say I want to add gov. All right, I can make it a sub of, but that's something that QuickBooks, we offer for QuickBooks. It's not necessary. And then the price level is a good way to propagate all the price levels to all the customers at the same time. All right, so let's say we want the 0 price level. Now that I have that, I can assign the customer type to the customer itself. Okay, so we go that, and so here is gov. And going back to my report here, which I just created. All right, so there is by item demo. I'm going to go ahead and customize that. Customer type is right here, so I can add that as a field. now that that customer type is there, I can add that. Oh, I'm going to add the name. Again, a lot of things have a name, so let's put the word type in here, customer type, and make that a section, and move that section. So now, instead of by customer, we have it by customer type. Okay. Any questions? I hope that's clear. So the main trick really is to find the piece of data that that you're looking for, and we try to make the names of the fields correspond to what you see on the screen. Okay, so if you look at kind of the items, you'll see a whole bunch of, these are a lot of calculated fields, the COGS account, you know, all these things, some of these are custom fields, the image, the max quantity, you know, corresponding to what you see on the actual document itself. All right, so I'm going to open it up. If anybody has some questions, go ahead and you can type in your questions in the chat. And so at this time, you know, I leave a good amount of time for questions. If anybody has, you know, a scenario that they want to present that they couldn't figure out or something like that, now's the time. All right. Well, I guess I did a good job then in explaining how the reports work. So again, I'll just summarize what we spoke about today. The reports are driven by report source groupings. Each report.
Hey, Ian.
Yeah.
We've got a couple questions in chat. Scott Robertson was asking, by using the count for the activities, is there a way to just view a summary of total activities per user rather than the breakdown of each activity per user and get a count at the bottom?
Yep. And yes, so what I want to do there is I want to convert. So we spoke about detailed reports today. We spoke about details reports, but let's say I do want a summary report. So you can see here on type, see it says tabular, which is really detailed, but I can say I want a summary. Okay. Now when I do a summary, I can't put things like, well, I could put the ID, but I can't put very detailed information about each activity. So I have to remove those. And unless I'm doing a section, I'll probably remove that as well. Okay. So now this summary report should give me what I'm looking for. Ooh. Can we put the user back on here? Username. So I'm not going to put any Okay, so what I had to do is I also had to remove some of the tables as well, because if I add this table, it's going to join and it's going to replicate because they're different. So I have to be very kind of just careful in terms of the tables. And we want to minimize the number of tables when you do a summary report. So in here I have an activity, and I'm going to remove this filter here. So again, I have is close equal false. I change it to a summary. I'm only adding the activity and the user. I'm adding the activity obviously because we're reporting, and then the user. And then all I'm getting here is the username and the ID is the count. So there it is. Now this is a count of all the activities, just to make that very clear. Make this okay. So that's the way you can create a summary report. Basically the same information, but instead of doing in details, you're going to do a summary, and at least one of these fields should have a summary function. All right. The same idea, let me just save that. Okay. The same goes for some of the other reports that we have.
Yeah, Ian, can you show some common inventory reports? ProLink was asking about them.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot of inventory reports that are available. So again, going back to my the
Oh, can you show us inventory by vendor?
by preferred vendor. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So we start off with this report. I'm going to new report. Now, this is the existing inventory, which corresponds to the inventory list. Okay, that's what that report is going to show. Then we have two movement reports by location and by bin. The one by bin is more granular because it shows both bins and lot numbers. And then we have the one by location. But if I just want to show inventory with the vendors, then I would pick the inventory report. Okay. Now, once I have the inventory report, I have the items table. So here's my inventory. And obviously I need the items. And if I have the items, I can join the vendor on the preferred vendor. Okay. So the items, and so now I have the three tables that I need. So I just kind of put in the vendor name here. Make that into a section. And then put the item name. Oops, we'll change that to item. And then whatever inventory I want. So let's say I want available. On hand, or let's say on hand. So there's the vendor's name, there's the item, there's what's on hand. Right? We can also summarize that as well, maybe filter out. So let's go ahead, customize again. And I'm going to pick the vendor ID here. So I just want to show ones that have vendor. Okay, so these are just ones. So what I did here is I went to a filter and I said, show me only ones that have a vendor. In other words, the vendor is not null. So that's my filter, and then it'll show me only the ones that have vendors. Okay. Does that answer ProLink, Lydia? Does that answer your question? I hope so. Thanks.
We've got a question from Andrew saying, how about a pivot report? How would we use that, and maybe an example of the purpose?
The pivot report? Sure. So a pivot report is another type of summary report, but instead of summarizing the data row-wise, all right? So, for example, inventory by location, as you can see here, each location is a row, right? Row, row, it's a section, right? So this is a detailed report. But sometimes I want to show it kind of in a more of a what's called a matrix. In other words, to have the locations above over here and then the items like that. So it's kind of a lot easier to look at a report like this. So how did I create this report? The first thing I did is the type over here is the pivot. And a pivot has to have a pivot column, at least one pivot column. So you can see here location is the pivot column. The data, in which case it's on hand and I'm doing a summary function, right? So that's important because I can do average, I can do count. So it has to have that. And then the rest of it is what's called row data, which is just related to the actual item itself. So what I'll do is I'll create a kind of a report that emulates this. And so we'll do a new report. I'll take my inventory report. I'm going to make it into a pivot, right? So obviously I need my inventory and my items, and I want to also do my location. In order to add location, you have to add bin. All right, so all right, so now I have my I want to create an inventory report with the columns on the as a pivot. Okay, so again, location, the name of the location is the pivot. See how I changed that to the pivot the pivot. All right. The data I want is, let's say, on hand. So I drag that on here, and I want to make that into a data, and I change that to sum. And then the last piece, I just need the name of the item or whatever else I want to put on here. in terms of each row. So now that's the item. So there's my pivot report. And let's say I want to include only certain locations. I can do something like that, where I filter out locations. It just won't put them in. Any questions on that? So that's a pivot report.
Probably our final one. Does the general inventory list include items that are both allocated and unallocated?
The general with allocated to what? So we have an article on how do we calculate inventory. So inventory basically is everything that, and there's a couple of things that are included in inventory. The main column is available, and that's for the sales side or using things on a work order. And that's everything that a ship dock has not been created for, period. When a ship dock is created, it takes it away from available. It may still be on hand because the ship dock status has not been shipped, in which case it's committed. Okay. So if we want to take a look at something like that, you can add the committed column and you can see what's committed. I can also add the on hand column, and it will clearly show this distinction. So you can see, and there's probably more, but part of the on hand includes things that are committed but just haven't been shipped out yet. If I go to the transactions and I actually filter by committed greater than 0, I'll get all the ship docks that were committed. So if I add them all up, there are there are whatever, some odd dollars here, some odd amounts of committed ship docks, so I can see all those very clearly. Any questions on that one?
Looks like that answered the question. She said thanks, and that's probably all the time we have for today.
All right. Well, I want to thank you. As Michael mentioned, we have about 44 minutes here of a recording that we're going to make available once we edit it down a little bit, so you can view this demonstration through our help portal. I want to thank you for taking the opportunity. We plan to do one of these every second week, so look out for the next webinar topic. All right. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.